Hello and welcome to this installment of Mrs. Russo's 6th grade life science. Today we're going to be talking about Darwin's theory of evolution. So who exactly was this Darwin person? Well, Charles Darwin was a naturalist, which is a person who observes and studies the natural world. And in 1831, he took a 5-year trip on a British ship around the world. And on this trip, he learned about diversity. And you'll remember that biodiversity is the number of different species in an area. And diversity, there can be diversity among organisms in the same species as well. And on his trip, Darwin saw tremendous diversity. In fact, he was amazed at the amount of diversity that he saw, organisms that had never, ever been seen before. And Darwin also studied fossils, which led him to the discovery of adaptations. And adaptations are traits that increase an organism's ability to survive and reproduce. So what was Darwin's hypothesis? He made all of these observations, and based on these observations of diversity in the world around him and fossil evidence, he came up with a hypothesis or a theory. And he said that species gradually change over many generations. This doesn't happen overnight, folks. It happens gradually over a long period of time. And he also said that species become better adapted to new conditions. So the environment changes, and this leads to adaptations. Let's go over some important terms before we get into some of these factors. So evolution is a gradual change in a species over time, over a long period of time. And Darwin's ideas are often referred to as the theory of evolution. And if you'll recall, a scientific theory is a well-tested concept that explains a wide range of observations. It's also a well-supported and widely accepted explanation of nature. So this is based off of evidence. It's not just his opinion about what happens. It was supported by all of these evidences that we talked about in a previous presentation. And so he also came up with this concept called natural selection. And natural selection is a part of evolution. It plays a role in evolution. And so what is natural selection? Well, it's a process by which individuals that are better adapted to their environment are more likely to survive and reproduce more than other members of the same species. For instance, in this picture, we see two different giraffes. One with a short neck and one with a long neck. Well, the giraffe with the long neck is able to reach leaves in taller trees where there's less competition for food. So he gets more food than the giraffe with the shorter neck. So the giraffe with the longer neck is better adapted to this environment, and therefore he's more likely to survive and reproduce than the giraffe with the short neck. So he wins out. The giraffe with the long neck wins out in this process of natural selection. And so there are factors that affect natural selection, and these are overproduction, variation, competition, and selection. And in the next few slides, we'll take each of these individually. And overproduction is when there are so many offspring produced that there are not enough resources such as food, water, and living space for all of them. And here we see a good example of overproduction. This is a huge herd of sheep that if they were like this out in the wild, they might not all survive. There might not be enough food and water for all of them. So natural selection would kick in and select for the individuals in the group that have adaptations to help them survive, that give them an edge over the others. And variation is any difference between individuals of the same species. For example, color, size, etc. We saw in that example with the giraffes, a long neck variety and a short neck variety, although that's not currently a variation of giraffe. In the past it was. And some of these variations make an organism or a species better adapted to its environment. In competition, when resources such as food, water, and living space are limited, the members of a species must compete with one another to survive. And that's seen in this picture, these two birds fighting over this poor little, I think that's a little sea turtle baby. When food is scarce, competition is increased, and therefore members of a species that have adaptations to help them overcome competition, they're the ones that are going to win out in natural selection. And then we have selection. Some variations make individuals better adapted to their environment and able to overcome all of those three previous factors that we talked about. For example, we have two moths here. In fact, I sometimes have a difficult time remembering that there is a second moth, one on the top. He is perfectly blended into his environment, and so his variation of coloring makes him perfectly adapted to his environment to be camouflaged from predators. And so this adaptation will help him to survive, and he is more likely to survive and go on and reproduce than his uncamouflaged friend there. So selection also plays a part in natural selection. So in summary, Darwin proposed that over a long period of time, natural selection can lead to change. This change is known as evolution. Helpful variations may accumulate in a species, while unfavorable ones may disappear. Well, thank you for watching, and I hope you have happy studies.